Have you ever wondered what results you're going to get between using a cheap watercolour paint and using a more expensive watercolour paint? Well, look no further, because in today's video we're going to be comparing $3 watercolour paints and $30 watercolour paints, just to see how different they really are and whether you can get away with spending a little bit of money but still getting great results from your paintings. Hi, I'm Amy, and if you are new around here, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell as well, just to make sure that you don't miss an update on my channel. But anyway, let's jump into today's video. First of all, let's go into swatching all of these paints. Now, swatching is really important, particularly if you're wanting to compare two different brands, because it's going to give you a really good visual of both the paints side by side. Also, swatching is really good because it's going to allow you to practice with paints before you jump right into a painting. Always important to do this whenever you get any new brands of paints. So first of all, we're going to swatch the more expensive paints. So what I'm doing is I'm swatching similar colours to what I have in the cheaper set of paints. So I'm sort of going for the same colour range as what's in the cheaper set of paints, just because with the cheaper set of paints I have a smaller set. So I'm going in, swatching all the colours, and what I would notice with these is that they are very vibrant. So the pigmentation is brilliant and the vibrancy as well. They're quite strong, bold colours. Also, the way they lay is very loose. They're very fluid paints as well, so it's very easy to go in and lay these down. They're not sort of chalky like some other paints. So now let's go and move on to the $3 paints. These are obviously our least expensive paints, and what I'm going to do is swatch similar colours to what I've just swatched of the more expensive paints. On the surface, they appear to be very good, so they've got nice colour ranges. However, what I would say is that they're not as bold and as strong as the pigmentation and vibrancy of the more expensive paints. The other thing with these paints is that they do feel a lot more chalky, so when they dry, there's more of a residue left behind, and some colours are very translucent. For example, this brown colour here. You can't really see it showing up, so you would be required to apply more layers of that colour in order for it to be showing up more. But on the whole, considering these are only cheap paints, I did expect this, and compared to some other cheap paints, these are actually pretty good. But so far I am getting like the feeling of you get what you pay for. So now let's go in and swatch all the colours from the $30 paints. So obviously there I just used a very limited colour swatch palette because of the smaller set of paints from the $3 paints. And now I'm going in and swatching all the colours. This is going to be really good for me to see all the colours down on paper and how they look in the flesh, rather than just leaving them in a paint palette. I always do this whenever I get any new paints, and I do this for my coloured pencils as well, because like I said, really important to practice with them first before jumping into paintings. Also with colour swatches, if you do have just a very small set of paints, this will be a great way for you to mix colours together and experiment with different colours as well, to stretch your paint palette further. And you definitely want to mix colours together and create new swatches of colour when you have a set like this with the $3 paints, where we literally have a small set of 10 or 12 colours. So I'm just going in and again creating these swatches. So as you can see, the colour pigmentation isn't bad. I'm noticing that there's issues with some colour as opposed to all of the colours. So some colours are better, and also it depends on how much paint is on the paintbrush. So if I'm using thicker amounts of paint, the colours are more vibrant compared to if I'm just using a small amount. So moving on, talking a little bit more about mixing now. As I said, it's really important to be able to mix colours together and use paints that are going to have an easy transition of colour so that you can stretch your paints further. We're starting off with the $30 paints, and I really love these paints because they're so easy to mix together, and that is exactly what you want if you want to stretch your paint palette further. It's going to be no good for you to be mixing paints together that really aren't fluid, that are not mixing well, that are leaving streaky lines. And because these are a good quality paint, the transition of colour is really good. Obviously you just have to make sure that you're using an appropriate amount of water, because water will really help you to mix colours together. Also, just wanted to point out that of course I am using a watercolour paper as well, so this is a paper suitable for watercolour. I can't stress enough how important it is to use the right paper as well in combination with your watercolour. So now for the $3 paints. Now they do struggle more with blending together than what the more expensive paints do, and a lot of that is down to their consistency. So as you can see, I'm getting a lot more streaky lines here, and also they feel a lot more chalky. There's a lot more residue left behind. But in terms of when they dry, the colours do appear to be very mixed together. I would just say that they're a lot more muddied than the more expensive colours. So for example, that yellow has become very muddied. It's almost become an orange colour when being mixed in with the red. So you need to be careful with these paints if you're mixing a much harsher colour in with a lighter tone. But with a little bit of work and making sure that you're using the right amount of water, they do blend. It's just, in my opinion, a little bit more difficult. Also, they are more translucent, so you might need to use more layers. And then again, just testing some little swatches here of colour, mixing colours in together and practicing with how they lay down. I definitely feel like the way the more expensive paints lay down is a lot more fluid and easier than the $3 paints. But again, I'm finding that certain colours are working better for me with these more cheaper paints than some other colours. Like for example, the red here is a lot more vibrant and bolder than some of the lighter tones, and it just seems to be easier to work with in my opinion. So now let's move on to creating some effects with these watercolour paints. So we're just going to start by doing a simple effect. I'm not going to go into anything too technical here. This is not a tutorial, it's more about an overview and a review. But what I'm doing is I'm just creating some gradient effects using both the watercolour paints, just to give you an idea of the type of results you're going to get by using both paints. So we're starting with the most expensive paints, and I always create washes of colour and gradient effects in my painting, and I do really love these paints because, like I said, they're very smooth, they lay down really well, they blend easy together, it's easy to apply water with them as well and get those smooth fluid results. And I also love these paints because they are great for layering as well. And even when you lay colours over, you're not getting a lot of blotchy or streaky results. I'm also making sure to use a big fluffy sort of brush as well with these paints, just to make sure that they're blending a lot more easier. Now moving on to the $3 paints, I was actually really impressed. I was expecting them to be harder to blend, which they were a little bit. They weren't as fluid and I had to apply a lot more water with these paints. But the overall result with these paints was that I found the more layers that I added, the better and smoother results I was getting. So I found that just a couple of layers, you could still see quite a few streaky lines, but the more that I went over them and applied more layers, that's when I really noticed them becoming a lot more vibrant and a lot more smoother, because a lot of the stubborn lines were being cancelled out. So I got really good results with these paints, and what I would say is that the more layers that you apply, the more vibrant they're going to become, the smoother results you're going to get. It's just about working more with them and spending more time building up your colours and layers. So what about mixed media? Now, watercolour is quite a flexible medium in that it can be used with a lot of other types of mediums and materials, and I love using watercolour in combination with 3 different types of techniques. That is illustration pens, gel pens, and also coloured pencils. Those are the 3 types of mixed media that I'll use in combination with watercolour. So I wanted to see whether or not the paints had an effect on the way that the illustration pens, gel pens, and pencils worked with the paints. And to be honest with you, I wasn't actually expecting them to be different, but they were. And I'm quite surprised by the results that I got. So I got really good results with the more expensive paints. As you can see, the gel pen there is really opaque, it really shows up. I also got good results when I was going in with the fine liner, so this will be great for details and outlines. And I felt that the white pencil that I was using showed up really well, so these would work really well with coloured pencils. Now, when we moved on to the $3 paints, I was really surprised at the difference between the results that I got. I was expecting them to be pretty on par with each other. I really didn't think that this would have an impact, but I'm glad that I did do this test because it did. So I just did some colour swatches there. I'm just laying down sort of random colours of paint, and then I'm just going over them just to see how well the gel pen and that showed up. As you can see, total difference there. The gel pen is really not working well with these paints. It's obviously to do with the pigment and whatever ingredients are in this paint, but it's hard to show up even though I'm going over and over and over it. Now, with the illustration pens, there's a bleed. So if you're wanting to do illustration lines or outlines, watch out for that because you could get bleeding lines, which I personally don't like. Now, the white pencil did show up okay. It wasn't the best, and I feel like I got a better result with the more expensive paints, but I do feel that actually out of those 3 tests, the white pencil showed up the best. But you can still see that it's quite translucent compared to the opaqueness of the first one. So here we can see the $30 paint. See the difference there? It stands up a lot more, there's not a bleed, and the white pencil there is definitely a lot more highlighted. And then with the $3 paints, you can see the white gel pen doesn't show up well, there's a bleed with the fine liner, and the white pencil doesn't show up as well. So let's do a little demonstration now with using both sets of paint. So I'm creating a very similar painting using the $30 paints in one and the $3 paints in the other. Let's see how they compare. So the first thing that I did was I just went in, created a very simple wash of water, and then I started to create our background. So I was using a lot of different colours and dropping them in. I tried to use similar colours, but obviously it's impossible for me to use the same colours. What I noticed was that I got a lot more depth and I got a lot more shadows and definition with the more expensive paints. But with the $3 paints, I had a lot more lighter areas. The other thing with the more expensive paints was that the black paint was a lot more opaque and a lot more intense than the $3 paint. So with the $3 paints, I had to keep going over the black paint quite a lot. But I do actually like the results that I got from both of them in different ways. I like the intensity of the more expensive paints, but I like the fact that I was able to bring through some lighter colours of the cheaper paints because of the fact they're not as intense and rich in pigmentation. So obviously the cheaper paints, you get a lot more lighter areas because it just doesn't have that ability to be as strong and intense as the more expensive paints. So I like both paintings in different ways. If I had to choose a favourite, I would say that I prefer the $30 paints just because I like the intensity of it and it's more like a night sky. But I do like the fact that we have almost like that sunset look in the $3 paint as well. Also, I would choose the more expensive paints just because close up when you look at these paintings, you definitely have a lot more smoothness and a better blend of colour, so the transition of blending is a lot more smoother than the $3 paints. And also with the more expensive paints, they are less chalky than the cheaper paints. But if you are just starting out and you are using cheaper paints, then you're going to be happy with the results that you get from them. I really didn't have an issue. I was quite surprised actually, and I've used more expensive watercolour paints that are not as good as those $3 paints. So it just shows that you can still get good results using cheap paints. And if we do a little comparison there, you can see the $30 paints in comparison to the $3 paints, and I've tried to include some up close shots for you as well, so you can really see the difference in the colours, the pigmentation, the vibrancy, the transition of colours as well. Lightfastness is a pigment's ability to resist against fading in natural light, and the Cotman Watercolors has really good Lightfast rating for all of their pigments, which means that if you're selling your paintings or showcasing them, they're going to be very resistant against fading. You can actually find the Lightfast chart online if you just search up the Cotman Watercolor paints, and there's also extra information on them just explaining all the terms and what it means. So this means that if you're going in and painting with them, your paints are going to last. You can also buy separately some dotting cards. Now these also have all the information in terms of Lightfastness on them, and you can create your own colour swatches from them as well. Now if we move on to the cheaper set of paints, unfortunately I could not find any information on Lightfastness, and that's an issue for me, especially if I'm going to be selling or showcasing your work. So you do need to be careful with Lightfastness and make sure that you're using paints with a good Lightfast rating. So what do I think of both of these paints? I think that the cheaper paints are really good for beginners because they are cheap, so they're affordable, easy to use, and they're good for practice. But I do feel that you will get better results from using a more expensive paint like the paints that I'm using in the video. The Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolour sets are going to give you a great starter pack, and I don't actually feel that they are that expensive for what they are either. They're a great paint set because they give you a great combination of colours, they're very pigmented, vibrant, and they're going to give you long-lasting results from your paintings as well. But anyway, I really hope that helped you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye guys!